They were stripping the skin from a man still alive, in long, precise ribbons, while he kept breathing. The entire body exposed, every muscle visible, every nerve ending screaming in silence. And that man kept speaking of Christ. This is the brutal story of Bartholomew, the apostle skinned alive in Armenia. Place yourself in the 1st century after Christ. The Roman Empire stretched from the western Mediterranean to Mesopotamia. The edges of the known world ended in inhospitable, poorly mapped regions, governed by local dynasties that accepted Rome only when convenient. It was in this fragmented world that a group of 12 men received the most improbable order in history. Go to all nations, preach the gospel, baptize in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And among those 12, there was a man whose name would divide traditions and whose death would travel 18 centuries without losing its weight. Bartholomew, or, as many scholars argue, Nathaniel. The same man Philip found in John chapter 1, verse 45. The same man who asked whether anything good could come out of Nazareth. The same man that Jesus, seeing him from a distance, described as a true Israelite in whom there was no deceit. That was Bartholomew. But what remains untold is what happened between that first encounter beneath the fig tree and the day his body was nailed down in Albanopolis in Armenia. What remains untold is why, of the 12 apostolic deaths, his endures as the most viscerally striking in the history of Western religious art. Consider the geopolitical situation of the territory to which Bartholomew traveled. 1st century Armenia was a buffer kingdom. Wedged between the Roman Empire to the west and the Parthian Empire to the east, it lived in permanent tension. Armenian kings rose and fell according to the convenience of the two powers. The capital, Artaxata, concentrated political authority, but the actual territory was a patchwork of cities and villages governed by local nobles. The gods worshipped varied by region. The pantheon included Aramazd, the supreme deity, and Anahit, goddess of fertility, whose temples were the economic and religious heart of every city. To destroy a temple of Anahit meant attacking not merely a religion, but an entire economy built on offerings, sacrifices, and pilgrimage. That was exactly what Bartholomew would do. Before that, however, the surviving records point to a journey that bordered on the impossible. Eusebius of Caesarea, writing in the 4th century, records that Bartholomew preached in India. Pantaenus of Alexandria, as early as the 2nd century, claims to have found in Indian territory a copy of the Gospel of Matthew in Aramaic, left there by Bartholomew decades before. Other traditions place him in Mesopotamia, in Persia, in Arabia Felix, and finally in Armenia. We are speaking of something in the range of 3,000 kilometers traveled under brutal conditions, on foot, in caravans, on small boats crossing deserts, mountain ranges, and bandit routes. Measure the physical challenge. A man without modern maps, without professional translators, without passports, without embassies. Only the memory of Christ's words and the occasional company of fellow disciples. The sandals he wore lasted at best 6 to 8 months on rugged terrain. Food depended on the hospitality of strangers. Water, more often than not, came from wells contaminated by parasites and endemic cholera. It is estimated that itinerant apostles of the 1st century lost, on average, 20% of their body weight during each long leg of travel. The human body, subjected to permanent displacement, begins metabolizing muscle protein when caloric intake falls below 1,200 calories per day. And that was the common diet of poor religious travelers. Temperatures across the steppes of Asia Minor could swing between 40 degrees in summer and -10 in winter. Tertian fevers, transmitted by mosquitoes, killed approximately 30% of non-immunized foreigners who crossed the marshy regions of the Euphrates. But the body was not the only enemy. The greatest threat was linguistic. Bartholomew spoke native Aramaic, probably some commercial Greek and perhaps some liturgical Hebrew. He arrived in regions where Middle Persian was spoken, along with Old Armenian, Indo-Aryan dialects, and South Arabian Arabic. Every sermon required an interpreter. Every interpreter introduced distortions. Every distortion could mean the difference between conversion and a death sentence. And yet he made it to Armenia. The records that survived come primarily from three sources: the Armenian tradition preserved by the Armenian Apostolic Church, the apocryphal Acts of Bartholomew, compiled in the 4th and 5th centuries, and the Golden Legend by Jacobus de Voragine, compiled in the 13th century on the basis of older documents. Together, these sources draw a story consistent in its broad strokes, though diverging on minor details. Witness the moment of Bartholomew's arrival in the kingdom of Polemius in Armenia. According to the accounts, he began preaching in peripheral regions where the king's control was weakest. He healed the sick, he cast out demons, and according to tradition, he freed the daughter of Polemius from a demonic possession that the local priests had been unable to treat with any rite available in their cultic arsenal. The king's conversion was the spark. Polemius accepted baptism, his family accepted, part of his court accepted, and the number of converts grew to such a degree that the priests of the temple of Anahit began losing revenue. It was not merely a matter of faith, it was money, it was political power, and above all, it was public humiliation before a foreigner in worn sandals and a plain tunic. Then Astyages entered the scene. Astyages was the brother of Polemius. While the king bowed before an unknown god brought by an itinerant foreigner, Astyages held fast to the old alliances, the old cult, the old privileges. For him, the foreign apostle represented a double threat, to the throne and to the religion. The temple priests saw in Astyages the natural avenger. They applied pressure, they bribed, they threatened, and Astyages yielded. The system worked for months. Astyages only watched, waiting for the exact political moment. And that moment came. Measure the magnitude of what happened next. According to the Armenian records and the Golden Legend, Astyages ordered the arrest of Bartholomew in the city of Albanopolis, identified in some sources as Albana, or a region near the Caspian Sea. Bartholomew was dragged through the streets, he was flogged, he was subjected to public interrogations, and then, to make an example of him, Astyages chose the most atrocious method available in the Persian and Armenian repertoire of the era: flaying. Pause to understand what that means in physiological terms. Adult human skin weighs an average of 5 kilograms and covers approximately 2 square meters of body surface. It contains more than 2 million nerve endings. It is irrigated by thousands of capillaries, traversed by 57 identifiable major arterial branches, and protected by a layer of keratin that forms the body's first barrier against the world. To remove the skin from a living being means exposing every one of those nerve endings simultaneously. It means opening the body to massive fluid loss, to immediate infection, to neurogenic and hypovolemic shock. Modern medical literature classifies complete flaying as one of the most painful forms of execution a human being can undergo. The threshold of conscious survival rarely exceeds 4 hours. The pain is of such intensity that the brain frequently enters crisis before the body collapses. Fevers of 40 degrees appear within minutes. Blood pressure plummets. The heart enters extreme tachycardia, and even so, historical records exist of victims who maintained consciousness and the ability to speak through almost the entire process. Bartholomew, according to tradition, was one of those victims. Persian and Armenian executioners had mastered a brutal technique. They began at the extremities, feet, hands, then the legs, the arms, the torso. The skin of the face was left for last, when death was already considered certain. Each strip of skin was separated from the muscular fascia with short, extremely sharp knives, whose edges were resharpened on whetstones every 20 minutes to maintain precision. The goal was not a quick death. It was to prolong the agony as public spectacle, as a warning to anyone who considered challenging the political and religious order. Follow the process, hour by hour. The first cuts were almost delicate. A long incision along the side of the foot, another at the heel. The skin separated from the flesh like a garment sewn from within. The victim, tied upright or suspended upside down, watched his own skin being removed centimeter by centimeter. Blood flowed in a steady stream. Exposed nerves responded to any current of air as though they were live coals raking an open wound. Every involuntary movement generated a wave of pain, equivalent to a third-degree burn simultaneously across dozens of points. Hours. Tradition holds that Bartholomew continued preaching throughout the process, that he spoke of Christ while losing his skin, that he recited psalms while the executioners worked on his arms. Whether this is devotional metaphor or historical record cannot be stated with absolute certainty, but the fact remains that no alternative tradition depicts him in panic or renunciation. Not the traditions most hostile to the Christian faith, not the most skeptical ones. That in itself is a detail worth recording. Consider the political theatre surrounding the execution. Astyages was not acting on impulse. The entire event was choreographed. A crowd was present. Priests of the Temple of Anahit were in attendance. Representatives of King Polemius, the executor's own brother, were forced to watch the apostle being dismantled alive. The intention was unmistakable, to demonstrate that the new faith had no protection, no power, no future. And yet, the opposite happened. The traditions diverge on the final moment. Some hold that Bartholomew died during the flaying from massive blood loss and hypovolemic shock. Others, the majority, record that after the complete removal of his skin, he was still breathing. And, to close the spectacle, Astyages ordered decapitation. The apostle's head was severed from his body with a blow from a scimitar. A few lesser sources mention crucifixion upside down before the beheading. Western Christian iconography, particularly from the Renaissance onward, fixed on the image of the apostle holding his own skin like a cloak. Michelangelo painted that scene in The Last Judgment on the Sistine Chapel ceiling, and, in a deeply unsettling detail, the face painted on the flayed skin that Bartholomew holds is Michelangelo's self-portrait. The artist placed himself, voluntarily, as the flayed man, hanging from the apostle's hand. Few works in the history of art compress so much symbolic weight into a single silent gesture. But Bartholomew's body still had a long journey ahead after death. Silence. For weeks, according to Armenian tradition, local Christians were unable to collect the remains. Astyages had forbidden it. The intention was that the body would rot in the open as a final warning. But two factors changed the situation. First, King Polemius, politically weakened as he was, still had allies who wished to honor the apostle. Second, the converted population, growing steadily in number, applied quiet pressure in nocturnal processions, in collective prayers that spread through the neighborhoods. The Christians of Armenia, still small in number but unyielding, managed to bury the remains in a discreet location. What no one anticipated was that those remains would travel farther than Bartholomew had in life. Around the year 578, according to medieval accounts, the remains were translated to the island of Lipari in the Tyrrhenian Sea, north of Sicily. Tradition holds that the body floated in a marble urn to the island, guided by improbable currents. Whatever its historical value, that narrative established Lipari as the home of the supposed relics for centuries. In 838, with the Arab invasion of Sicily, the relics were transported again, this time to Benevento in southern Italy. And in 983, part of them was brought to Rome, to the Tiber Island, where the Basilica of San Bartolomeo alle Sola was erected and stands to this day. Measure the trajectory. A man who died at the edge of the ancient world ended up resting at the center of Western Christendom. An apostle flayed alive in Albanopolis was mourned by popes in Rome. A martyr whose only certainty in life was imminent death became the patron of tanners, butchers, bookbinders, and in the modern extension of dermatologists. The irony is so dense, it seems intentional. But Bartholomew's legacy does not reside only in relics. Examine the details of his impact on Armenia. The kingdom that Astyages tried to purge of the apostle became, in 301 after Christ, the first state in the world to officially adopt Christianity as its national religion, under King Tiridates III. This happened 12 years before the Edict of Milan, which legalized Christianity in the Roman Empire. The Armenian Apostolic Church attributes its founding to two apostles, Jude Thaddeus and Bartholomew. The blood shed by Bartholomew, according to Armenian ecclesiastical narrative, was the seed of the first Christian nation on earth. The monastery of St. Bartholomew, built on the traditional site of his martyrdom, functioned for more than 16 centuries. It was destroyed in 1915 during the Armenian genocide carried out by the Ottoman Empire. Its ruins remain in the southeast of present-day Turkey, in a region now difficult to access. Pilgrims who manage to reach it describe a silence that weighs on you. Stacked stones, half-collapsed arches, wind beating against abandoned structures, and the memory, impossible to erase, of what happened there. Note a detail that is rarely mentioned. The martyrdom of Bartholomew did not occur in a vacuum. It was part of a wave of apostolic executions that swept through the first century. Peter, crucified upside down in Rome. Andrew, crucified in Patras on an X-shaped cross. James the Greater, beheaded in Jerusalem. Thomas, killed by a lance in India. Matthew in uncertain territory. Paul, beheaded in Rome. Simon the Zealot, reportedly sawed in half. Thaddeus, martyred in Armenia alongside Bartholomew. Philip, crucified in Hierapolis. James the Less, stoned to death. Matthias, chosen by Lot to replace Judas, killed in a disputed location. Only John, according to tradition, died of natural causes, already elderly, in Ephesus. 11 of 12 died for the faith. 2/3 by methods involving prolonged torture. That did not happen by accident. Calculate the sociological magnitude. If a dozen men chose the most brutal death over public denial of a belief, there are two possible explanations. Either that belief was, for them, a conviction witnessed with their own eyes, indisputable in their innermost selves, or they were collectively wrong and still endured tortures that would break any conventional human mind. History records many fanatics. It records very few cases, however, in which an entire group of eyewitnesses, independently subjected to interrogation under torture, in regions far distant from one another, sustained convergent accounts until their last breath. Bartholomew was one of those. And what he saw, according to tradition, began beneath a fig tree. When Jesus told Nathanael that he had seen him before Philip even called him, Nathanael responded with something few grasp in its full depth. "Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel." Jesus promised he would see greater things. And, by all appearances, Bartholomew took that promise to its absolute limit. To see greater things meant for him witnessing the birth of the church in territories where no one expected it. It meant witnessing conversions amid polytheism. It meant witnessing miracles at royal courts. And it meant, in the end, watching his own body dismantled as payment for the message he delivered. A difficult question surfaces here, one that is hard to sidestep. Why did tradition preserve so much of Bartholomew's story if he is, among the 12, one of the least mentioned in the canonical scriptures? The probable answer lies in the nature of his death. In a world where crucifixion was commonplace and beheading was routine, flaying stood apart. It was so rare, so visually arresting, so emblematically cruel that it fixed collective memory in a way that was nearly indelible. Renaissance painters turned to Bartholomew when they wished to portray extreme suffering endured for faith. Sculptors immortalized him in cathedrals. The Cathedral of Milan itself houses one of the most extraordinary statues ever carved in marble. Bartholomew standing upright, musculature perfectly anatomized, carrying his own skin over his shoulders as though it were a folded cloak. The work is by Marco da Grate, completed in 1562. Those who see it up close find it difficult to forget. Every vein, every tendon, every joint is exposed with anatomical precision that would not become common in medicine until centuries later. The statue remains as a permanent reminder that faith, at some point in history, cost the skin of those who carried it. Months. That was the approximate time Bartholomew's mission lasted in Armenia before his arrest. In months, he converted nobles, dismantled the influence of temples, destabilized an ancient religious structure, and it took the equivalent of an entire lifetime of preparation to build that window of opportunity. Decades walking through hostile territories, decades learning to communicate with distinct peoples, decades, in all likelihood, living with hunger, with illness, with aching feet, with private doubts that no text preserved, but that any human being would recognize as familiar. Because Bartholomew was human. He was not a marble hero. He was not a static figure in a stained glass window. He was a man who, at some point in his life, had parents, friends, perhaps brothers, who felt homesick, who wanted a warm, home-cooked meal on some cold night in Mesopotamia, who received news of other apostles dying and had to decide whether to continue, who was afraid, certainly, and who pressed on regardless. Witness the final moment through a different lens. Imagine the scene in Albanopolis. The smell of fresh blood mingled with incense from the temples of Anahit, the damp heat of the Caspian lowlands, the sound of executioners working in focused silence, the crowd surrounding them, part horrified, part enthralled, part indifferent, Astyages standing impassive, knowing the political system would reward him for the execution, and at the center, a man whose only possession was a conviction impossible to tear away along with the skin. Astyages won that day. Technically, politically, militarily, but on a historical scale, Astyages lost everything. His name today appears only in hagiographic treatises as the executor of Bartholomew. His lineage, his deeds, his alliances, his speeches, his military conquests, all of it evaporated. What remains is a marginal name in accounts that paradoxically were only preserved because Bartholomew died at his hands. Astyages entered history through the door of infamy, not realizing he was opening a door he could never close. Meanwhile, Bartholomew became the patron of nations. No engineer calculated this, no political strategist foresaw it, no imperial senate authorized it. The transformation happened at the margins of official records, in converted households, in clandestine gatherings, in baptisms performed in hidden streams, in memories passed from parents to children across 18 centuries. Empires fell, Rome fell, Parthia fell, the Ottoman Empire fell, the Soviet Union fell, and the name of Bartholomew remains. Sit with that for a moment. A man without an army, without wealth, without a throne, without heirs, without a state, without a formal philosophical school, without a surviving literary work, only a belief and the courage to sustain it until the complete removal of his skin. And yet, this man influenced global culture for 2,000 years. Monuments were erected in his memory in at least 8 countries. Churches bear his name on 5 continents. His liturgical feast day is celebrated by Catholics on the 24th of August, by Armenians on a nearby date, by Orthodox Christians on a separate calendar. And in all of these celebrations, one element is constant: the image of the apostle holding his own skin as a visual testament of non-negotiable conviction. Observe what that image communicates. It is not suffering as an end in itself. It is not martyrdom as devotional spectacle. It is testimony. It is the skin carried as proof that conviction held past the breaking point of the human body. It is the visible face of an uncomfortable question that the narrative hurls at the observer. What exactly must someone believe in order to sustain that? History does not answer, it only records, and the record is brutal, precise, and impossible to file away in footnotes. Bartholomew died in Albanopolis in Armenia, probably around the year 68 after Christ, by order of Astyages, after being flayed alive and beheaded. His remains traveled across 3 continents over 8.5 centuries before coming to rest in Rome. Armenia, the territory of his martyrdom, became the first nation in the world to adopt Christianity as its official religion, 233 years after the apostle's death. The image of his despoiled body crossed Western art as the symbol of faith taken to its absolute extreme. Bartholomew built no cathedrals in his lifetime. He wrote no canonical gospels. He founded no theological schools. He presided over no councils. He left no preserved letters. He died unknown to the elites of the world that mattered politically. And yet, 2,000 years later, his absence from the official record matters far less than the mark left on the concrete human beings whose lives crossed his. The daughter of Polemius himself, the converted nobles, the peasants baptized in freezing streams, the scribes who preserved the story in Armenian codices, the pilgrims who walked to Lipari, to Benevento, to Rome. Each of them was touched by a brief encounter with a man whose greatest legacy was not written on parchment, but lived, suffered, and delivered layer by layer. The story of Bartholomew is, in many respects, the story of what happens when a human life is spent entirely on something larger than itself. No material inheritance, no name immortalized in economics textbooks or military treatises. Only a question, suspended over everyone who hears the narrative: what in my own life would I sustain until the last layer of skin? No listener needs to answer aloud, but no one escapes the question.